Welcome back, everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into Genesis chapter 2.
Genesis 2.
It's a text, well, it's had a massive influence
Huge.
in Western thought.
Yeah.
We think of it as a religious text, but it's so much more than that. It's
Yeah.
woven into
It really is.
art and literature, and even just how we think about the world. So we're going to go beyond just the surface
Yeah.
to uncover some of the really fascinating
Layers.
layers,
Yeah.
exactly, in the creation story, the Garden of Eden, and the very beginnings of humanity.
You know what I think is so often overlooked is that Genesis 2, it doesn't start with the act of creation, but with its completion.
Oh, interesting.
Thus, the heavens and the earth were finished and all the host of them. It's this powerful statement about closure before we even get into the details.
It was like starting a movie with the ending and then rewinding to see how it all came to be.
Exactly.
And right after that declaration of completion, we get the Sabbath established. God rests on the seventh day, blesses it, sanctifies it.
This concept of Sabbath, this designated time for rest, I mean, it's echoed throughout history in so many cultures and traditions, and I think it's fascinating. It makes you wonder, in our always-on world, have we lost touch with the need for that kind of intentional rest and reflection, that the Sabbath represents?
It's food for thought, for sure.
Yeah.
I think now we kind of wear busyness as a badge of honor, but, Genesis suggests that there's a lot of value in pausing and appreciating completion.
In just being.
Yeah.
Just being.
And then, we're introduced to a world unlike anything we know today, right? A world without rain. Genesis describes a mist rising from the earth to water the plants. It's just this detail that really sparks the imagination.
It's almost mystical, isn't it?
It is.
This pre-rain world, and it makes you rethink, well, this is how I think things work, and this is saying maybe not.
Right.
And even the natural laws that we just take for granted maybe were different at the dawn of creation.
I think it reminds us that these stories, they were often conveyed through imagery and symbolism.
Right. Inviting us to kind of look beyond the literal meaning.
Oh, okay.
And speaking of symbolism, we then encounter the creation of Adam. And how is he formed? He's formed from the dust of the ground.
Yeah. God breathes life into this dust, and all of a sudden there's a living soul. I mean, that's such a powerful image, this idea that we, humans are made of the earth from the very substance of this planet.
It raises a lot of interesting questions about our responsibility to the natural world, right? I mean, if we are literally formed from the earth, does that suggest, a duty of care and need to respect, nurture our planet?
And, it's so timely, too, with, all the environmental challenges that we're facing. So where does God place this newly created man? In the Garden of Eden, of course, right?
Of course, paradise.
Filled with every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food.
And among these trees, two stand out, right? The tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah.
And their symbolism has been debated for centuries. I mean, some see the tree of life as representing immortality, while others connect it to a deeper, more spiritual connection with God. There's so many layers there to unpack.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the tree of knowledge? What does it symbolize for you?
That's a great question. For me, the tree of knowledge, it represents that kind of inherent human desire to understand, to explore, to kind of push boundaries, But I think it also hints at, the potential consequences of unchecked ambition and the dangers of knowledge without wisdom.
That's a really interesting take. So it's suggesting that knowledge in and of itself isn't good or bad.
Right.
It's how we use it, the choices we make with that knowledge that really determine the outcome. And speaking of choices, there's a pretty significant one presented to Adam in the garden.
The forbidden fruit. God explicitly tells Adam, don't eat from the tree of knowledge, saying that doing so will result in death. And it sets up, this really interesting dynamic, that tension between obedience and free will, between trusting in divine guidance and forging your own path.
And it begs the question, what is so dangerous about this knowledge?
Right.
Is it just about disobedience?
Yeah.
Or is there something inherently risky about seeking certain kinds of knowledge?
Some scholars think that the forbidden fruit represents this kind of knowledge that would elevate humans to a godlike status, potentially disrupt that divinely ordained order of creation. Others interpret it as the knowledge of good and evil itself, suggesting that before they ate the fruit, Adam and Eve, they existed in this state of pure innocence, totally unaware of, the complexities of morality.
So almost like a world without consequences.
It is mind-blowing, isn't it?
It is.
It raises all these questions about the nature of innocence and experience, you know? Is innocence something to be protected at all costs?
Mm.
Or is there value in venturing beyond those boundaries, even if it means encountering pain and suffering along the way? I mean, these are questions that philosophers and theologians, they've grappled with this for millennia.
It's amazing how these stories from so long ago still are so relevant to us today.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get into the consequences of that choice, I want to go back to another fascinating detail in this chapter.
Okay.
The creation of Eve. This moment when God decides it is not good that the man should be alone
Yeah.
and sets out to create this companion for Adam. And it's not just any companion.
Right.
It's a helpmeet for him.
Yeah.
This partnership of mutual support and understanding.
It introduces this idea of companionship as a fundamental human need, right? This longing for connection and intimacy that it even transcends the idyllic setting of the Garden of Eden, right? I mean,
And the way God goes about finding that companion. I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah.
Because first, he brings all the animals to Adam to be named. It's such a powerful image about humans' capacity for language and categorization.
yeah,
It's like, we want to understand, organize the world.
our place in it.
Yeah. Establish our place in this grand scheme of creation.
And can you imagine? I mean, can you imagine Adam trying to come up with names for every single creature? I mean, it's
Trying to name the giraffe or a platypus.
it's hilarious.
I know, it just adds a bit of levity to this,
Yeah.
serious narrative.
It does. It reminds us that even in the midst of these weighty themes, there's room for playfulness and wonder. But, despite all these amazing creatures, none of them quite fit the bill as a suitable companion for Adam.
So God decides to take a, let's say,
More creative.
more creative approach.
He puts Adam into a deep sleep, takes one of his ribs, and from that rib creates woman.
It's so interesting, this origin story that just emphasizes, this connection between man and woman.
Yeah.
Bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, Adam declares.
Oh.
Their shared origin, inherent bond.
It's had such a profound impact on, how we understand gender roles and relationships. And, it suggests this deep-rooted equality between man and woman, the sense of being two halves of a whole. But it's also been used, to justify traditional patriarchal structures, too.
Mm-hmm.
And it raises, important questions about how these ancient texts have been interpreted and applied throughout history.
Reminds us that even these foundational stories
Yeah,
can be understood in many different ways.
absolutely.
And the interpretations, they keep evolving as our values as a society shift and change. And speaking of foundational ideas, right after the creation of Eve, Genesis brings in another concept that's shaped human society.
You're talking about marriage.
Yes, Mary.
The verse that says, "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh."
Exactly. So right here in the garden,
Yeah.
we see the establishment of marriage and family
Yeah.
as these cornerstones of human society.
It speaks to that deep human need for connection, intimacy, belonging. I mean, the formation of family units, the leaving behind of one's parents to create a new household. I mean, these are themes that have resonated across cultures and throughout history.
And it all leads to this image at the end of the chapter of Adam and Eve, naked and not ashamed.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
So beautiful.
This image of unashamed nakedness, it's been interpreted in so many ways. Some see it as the state of pure innocence, this time before self-consciousness or shame entered, the human experience.
It's like this glimpse into a world where vulnerability wasn't something to fear or hide, but just this natural and accepted part of being human.
And it suggests this harmony, not just between man and woman, but between humanity and nature, and between humans and the divine.
Such a powerful image to end this part of the story.
It is.
Just this snapshot of paradise before the fall.
Before the fall.
A reminder of the beauty and innocence that existed at the very beginning.
It's this moment of serenity and connection that invites us to, I think, reflect on our own lives, our own relationships, and, our own place within the grand tapestry of creation. It really does make you think, doesn't it? Like, how do we get back to that sense of, unashamed vulnerability, that kind of deep connection with ourselves, each other, and the natural world?
Yeah, how do we get back there? It's a big question.
It is.
Maybe it starts with just recognizing, our shared humanity. We're all connected.
Yeah.
Part of this web of life.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thought. And speaking of interconnectedness, I want to go back to those rivers flowing out of Eden. Remember, Genesis names 4: Pison, Gihon, Hiddekel, and Euphrates. We know the Euphrates, but the locations of those other
They
three,
throw those.
there's still debate. It's like, a treasure map leading to these lost worlds. The Pison is associated with gold, bdellium, and onyx stone. It suggests this land of just riches and beauty. And the Gihon is said to encircle the entire land of Ethiopia, so vast, hinting at the vastness and diversity of the ancient world.
It really does spark the imagination, right?
Right.
Connecting the Garden of Eden to the wider world. Paradise isn't isolated.
Exactly. It's this reminder that even in this place of perfection, there's this need for outward flow,
Yeah.
connection and interaction with the world beyond. It's like, what are the rivers flowing out of our own lives? What are those connections that nourish us and sustain us? How do we impact the world around us?
I love that. Let's shift gears a little bit. Talk to me about dressing and keeping the garden. It's God's instruction to Adam, but it's not super clear what it means. What does this directive tell us about humanity's role in the world?
It's a passage that's been interpreted in so many ways.
Yeah.
Some see it as this mandate for, responsible stewardship,
Okay.
a call to care for and cultivate the natural world. Others interpret it as more of a grant of dominion.
Yeah.
Humans have the right to rule over nature and utilize it for their own purposes.
Oh, interesting.
So we're still grappling with that today, right?
Yeah. Finding that balance between our needs and the needs of the planet. Utilization and preservation.
Absolutely. I don't think Genesis necessarily offers any easy answers, but it presents us with a question. What kind of relationship are we meant to have with the natural world? Are we caretakers, partners, or conquerors?
Oh, that's a good question. It's a question that every generation has to answer for themselves. Before we wrap up, I want to go back to the forbidden fruit. Why do you think God forbade Adam and Eve from eating from that tree of knowledge?
It's the question, right? It's puzzled theologians and philosophers for centuries.
For sure.
Some believe the fruit represented knowledge that was just simply not meant for humans. It would disrupt the natural order of creation. Others suggest it was more of a test of obedience for God to gauge their loyalty and their trust.
Like a cosmic game of trust with really high stakes.
Really high stakes.
Yeah. And the consequences for failing that test were pretty big. Eating that forbidden fruit brings sin and suffering into the world. It changed everything.
It did. It's a stark reminder that our choices have consequences, both for ourselves and for, future generations. And it raises these questions about free will and the limits of human knowledge.
Knowledge is power, but it can be a dangerous power.
Yeah, it can be dangerous if not tempered with wisdom and humility. It's a cautionary tale, I think. Even in our world today, information overload everywhere. How do we discern what's truly valuable? How do we avoid the pitfalls of knowledge without understanding?
That's something to think about. Maybe the key is realizing that knowledge isn't an end in itself.
Yeah.
It's a tool to be used for good or for bad. We need that wisdom, seek understanding, use our knowledge responsibly. That's a powerful message.
Yeah.
Speaks to the enduring relevance of these stories.
Genesis chapter 2, it offers us this glimpse into the origins of humanity, our relationship with God, the complexities of our existence, a story filled with symbolism and metaphor and really profound insights into the human condition.
And it's a story that just keeps challenging us and inspiring us.
Absolutely.
Inviting us to delve deeper into these mysteries of life.
Yeah. It's a reminder, I think, that the journey of discovery is just as important as the destination, It really is. It's not always about, having all the answers, but sitting with the questions. It can be so enriching.
Totally. And speaking of journeys, let's go back to those mysterious rivers for a second.
Oh.
We talked about the Pison and the Gihon, but there are two more, the Hiddekel and the Euphrates.
Oh, right. The Euphrates. We know that one today. It flows through modern-day Iraq, connecting us to this ancient world.
So cool.
But the Hiddekel, it's a little more of a mystery. Some think it's talking about the Tigris River, also in the Mesopotamian region.
It's just fascinating to think about these rivers as these geographic markers, anchoring the story in a real place and time. It's like these narratives, they weren't just abstract myths. They were rooted in, the lives of real people walking this earth centuries ago.
It makes you wonder, what stories will we leave behind? What traces of our lives will still be around for future generations?
That is a big question. It makes you think about the legacy that we're creating, as individuals, as a society. Are we building something that will last? Are we making the world a better place?
It's a question we all have to wrestle with. Maybe Genesis gives us a little direction here. It reminds us that we're part of something so much bigger than ourselves, and we have this role to play in creation.
We're not just watching it all happen.
No, we're active participants. We're called to, cultivate and care and create. And even when things get tough, even after the fall, there's always that hope for redemption, for renewal, for a return to that state of grace and harmony.
A message of resilience.
Yeah.
It's powerful. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Genesis chapter 2, I'm just in awe of how much depth and richness there is to unpack in this ancient text. It's a story that's traveled across cultures and time, offering insights into what it means to be human that are just as important today as they were thousands of years ago.
It really is. It pushes us to explore these big questions, grapple with the complexity of life, find meaning in our own individual journeys, and leaves us with that image, that lasting image of Adam and Eve, naked and unashamed, a reminder of the innocence and beauty that's at the very heart of creation.
Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. I hope it sparked some curiosity and inspired you to keep exploring Genesis chapter 2. Until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking, and keep discovering.